Okay, good morning to you all students.
Good morning, ma'am.
Let me know if you can see the screen so that we'll start. Is it visible?
Yes, ma'am. It's visible.
Yeah. Okay, welcome to this last lecture under module 4. In the previous session, we have seen about coherency model and parallel copying with DISC-CP. But because of this long gap due to internal exams, let us just go through the previous two concepts once again quickly and then proceed with the concepts of keeping a HDFS cluster balanced and Hadoop archives. Now, what is this coherency model used for? This coherency model for a file system describes the data visibility of reads or writes for a file. Say if the client wants to see what is the status of read or write, or if the write has happened properly without any errors. Is the data consistency preserved after writing the data to the file on a HDFS cluster? If you want to see these details, this coherency model will be useful. Now, after creating a file, it is visible in the file system's namespace, right? For that, we have a small template here. Let's take the path, create an object to the new file path, and create the file with that path so that it exists in that path in the file system by using fs.create using this file path, and just use this method assert that in order to see whether the existing status is equal to the specified status. Whether the existing status of the file system is true, means whether the file has been created or not. You are checking with a standard true option. Boolean value, right? So if both results in true, we can understand that the file is created in the file system. Now, any content returned to the file is not guaranteed to be visible even if the stream is flushed. So the file appears to have a length of 0. Sometimes when the data is accumulated and flushed onto the file system, is flushed onto the file, written onto the file, still it doesn't ensure that it appears to the client. Why? Because a complete block has to be written in order to make that block visible to the user. That is why, though the stream has been flushed, the file appears to have a 0 length most of the time. That can be checked by using this code snippet. We are creating a object and creating a new file with that path object and linking it to the output stream. And we are writing the contents to the file by using write method of the. Now you are using out.flush method in order to flush the data that is accumulated to be written onto the file that is created. Now you are trying to check the file status whether the data is written to the file or not. For that you are using file system dot get file status method. This we have seen while working with the file system status concept, right? So in this, we are trying to find out whether the data is written to the file or not. That is why we are using fs.getFileSystem, get file status from the file, get its length, and see whether it is still equal to 0, which indicates that the data is flushed, but it is not visible to the user. Both of these will actually return 0, indicating that though the output stream is flushed, though the data is written onto the file, it is not visible to the user because data has been only flushed, but the block is not completed to be written. When the block is not completed, only partial block is filled, that data will not be visible to the user. So once more than a block's worth of data has been written, only then the first block will be visible to the new readers. That is what I tried to explain you. Now, HDFS provides a method for forcing all buffers to be synchronized to the data nodes via the sync method on FS data output stream. You know that the replication factor has to be maintained on HDFS clusters, and the default replication factor is 3. So the HDFS will provide a method called as sync in order to ensure that all the buffers are synchronized to the data nodes. All the buffers of data are safely written to all the data nodes in the right pipeline in order to meet the replication factor, default replication factor. So after a successful return from sync, only when it indicates that the synchronization to the data nodes is complete, then HDFS guarantees that the data written up to that particular point in the file has reached all the data nodes in the right pipeline, and then it is visible to all the new readers. So what the sync method is doing exactly is it will ensure that all the data nodes receive the data that is flushed through the buffer, and only then it is visible to the reader or the client. For that, we are using this code snippet to just check whether the data is written or not after the block is filled. For that, again, we are creating the path object and creating the file, writing the contents to the file by using a flash mode so that the file, the data is written onto the file. And we are also calling this sync method of output stream explicitly so that it will ensure that the data is written to all the data nodes in the right pipeline, and that we can ensure once again by using assert that method, which will get the file status content from this file, file status of the content in this file by using getLength method, and whether it is equal to what is already existing in the file. If both are equal, then it is ensured that the file is safely written by by using the flush and sync methods. Now, this behavior is similar to fsync system call in POSIX, Portable Operating System Interface, that commits buffered data for a file descriptor. This you might have used in Unix, right? This fsync, which commits buffered data for a file descriptor. Now, for example, using the standard Java API to write a local file, we are guaranteed to see the content after flushing the stream and synchronizing. But that is not the case in HDFS. When you're working with standard Java API, after flushing the stream and synchronizing, you can see the data that in the file that is written to the file. But in HDFS, after flushing, it has to call the sync method, which will again ensure whether the data is written to all the data nodes. Only then the data will be visible to the user. This is again checked with this code snippet. Here we created a local file on the local file system and written the contents. That is what we do actually in Unix, that is being shown here. Now by using out.flush, we are flushing to the operating system. Again by using getfd dot sync, we are syncing it to the disk also. This is get the file disk and sync the data to the file disk. Now only when this sync is done, it is visible on the disk. It is visible on the file disk. But if you stop with just using out.flush, you can't see the data that is written onto the file disk. So you need to explicitly call this out.getfd sync method in order to see whether it is safely written onto that particular disk or not. This can be checked by using assert that method by comparing the local file's length with the file contents length. If both are same, then we can get assured that the file is safely written onto that disk. So this fsync method and the HDFS cluster sync method are the same. Without using this sync method, you can't ensure that the data is safely written onto file disk in the case of Unix system and data nodes in case of HDFS cluster. Now, how to close a file? Closing a file in HDFS performs an implicit sync. While closing a file, you need not call sync method explicitly. It safely calls sync method implicitly before closing the output stream. That we can check with this code again. After creating a new path to the file and connecting it to the output stream and creating the file and writing the contents to the file, you are trying to close the output stream. When you're closing the output stream, it will implicitly call this sync method. In your previous case, you have explicitly called sync method in order to ensure that all the data nodes get the copy of that data that is being written. But in this case, because you're closing this output stream, it will implicitly call the sync method and sees that the data nodes gets the copy of the blocks. Now this is again ensured by using assert that method, get the file status, get the length of the file, and you're comparing it with the actual content in the file by using content.length. If we are saying that both will be true in this case, indicating that the data is safely written onto the data nodes. What are the consequences for application design while using this sync or by using this coherency model? With no calls to sync, you should be prepared to lose up to a block of data in the event of client or system failure. If you don't use the sync method, then if some client failure happens, or if some system failure happens, in that case, minimum amount of data lost is one block of data. That is why you have to compulsorily use this sync method in order to ensure that the data is safely returned to all the data nodes in the right pipeline. Now, for any applications, this is unacceptable to lose any blocks of data. So you should call sync at suitable points, at suitable checkpoints, such as after writing a certain number of records or after writing some number of bytes. Even frequently call this sync method in order to ensure safe writing of data onto the data nodes. Now, though the sync operation is designed to not unduly tax HDFS, means it doesn't overburden HDFS too much, but it does have some overhead. So there is a trade-off between data robustness and the throughput. Means you need to maintain a trade-off. You need to either compromise with throughput or with data robustness. If data robustness is very important to you, or if the data criticality is very important to you, you can't afford to lose any data. In that case, if you don't want to compromise with the data robustness, you have to call this sync method at frequent intervals of time after writing certain number of records or certain number of bytes. But if you want high speed of writing or reading the data, if you want to perform this read-write task very quickly, but you want to compromise with the data robustness, in that case, you may not use this sync method. You should be ready now. You should be ready to skip this sync method if throughput is very important to you. Now, what constitutes an acceptable trade-off is application dependent, and suitable values can be selected after measuring your application's performance with different sync frequencies. Just try using different sync frequencies and see how it is affecting the throughput of your system or throughput of your data node. Based on that, you can take a decision how frequently you need to call this sync method in order to not compromise too much with the throughput. Now let us see how to use this distcp tool in order to copy data from one cluster to another cluster. Parallel copying with distcp. The HDFS access patterns that we have seen so far focus only on single-threaded access, right? It is not taking multiple reads or writes. So far, we have seen examples where the HDFS serves client requests of at most only one client. But now let us see if it wants to support multi-threaded access, how it is carried on. It's possible to act on a collection of files, but for efficient parallel processing of these files, you should have to write a program yourself. right? It can act on collection of files. You can support multiple clients which request access to collection of files. But for efficient parallel processing of these files, you would have to write a program by yourself. Now, Hadoop comes with a useful program called DisCP for copying large amounts of data to and from Hadoop file systems in parallel. It can support multiple threads of access by different clients. Now, the canonical use case for DisCP is for transferring data between two HDFS clusters. If you want to transfer data between two HDFS clusters within a data center or across data centers, how it is carried on with DisCP. If the clusters are running identical versions of Hadoop, the HDFS scheme is appropriate. You can use HDFS scheme in both the cases. For that, see the command here. We are using %Hadoop using the program DisCP in order to copy the data from name node 1 cluster to name node 2 cluster. That is from the first cluster's name node to the second cluster's name node. From the root directory FO to the root directory bar, right? In this both cases, we are using the source cluster URI as HDFS as well as the destination clusters URI as HDFS. Now this will copy the root, this will copy the content from FO directory from the first cluster to the bar directory on the second cluster. So the second cluster ends up with the directory structure bar, and because the directory the contents from FO directory are being copied, now the directory structure on the second cluster will be /bar/foo. That is what I mentioned here. Now, if /bar doesn't exist, means if the directory you specified for the destination cluster doesn't exist, then it will be created first and the contents from the first cluster are copied. Now you can specify multiple source paths and all will be copied to the destination. If you want to copy from multiple source paths, it is possible. But source paths must be absolute source path. They should not be relative source paths. Now by default, DisCP will skip files that already exist in the destination, but they can still be overwritten by using the -override option. Say if there are some content existing in the destination cluster, then you can skip copying them. But still sometimes you doubt that you made some modifications in the first cluster's directory, first cluster's files under a directory that you are trying to copy. In that case, better you want to overwrite all the files in the destination cluster. In that case, you can forcefully overwrite by supplying this command -overwrite. By using this option -overwrite, which will forcefully overwrite even the existing files in the destination cluster. Now you can also update only the files that have changed using the -update option. Say you don't want to waste time on simply overwriting all the content. You just want to overwrite only the updated files in the source cluster. In that case, you can use -update option in order to update only the files that have changed. Now there are more options to control the behavior of DisCP, including ones to preserve file attributes, ignore failures, and limit the number of files or total data copied. You have various options which you can specify while giving this command. Now DisCP is implemented as a MapReduce job where the work of copying is done by the maps that run in parallel across the cluster. Because you want this DisCP to support multiple threads, all this copying of data across the clusters are implemented as a MapReduce job where the work of copying is done by the map tasks that run in parallel across the clusters. There are no reducers in this case. Actually, we spell it as map reduce job, but we don't actually use reducers in this case. Why? Because we don't want to consolidate any information or consolidate any results. We are just copying the data across the clusters. That's it. So each file is copied by a single map, and this CP tries to give each map approximately the same amount of data by bucketing files into roughly equal allocations. So this map tries to use the same amount of data while copying the data across the clusters. Now the number of maps is decided as follows. Because it's a good idea to get each map to copy a reasonable amount of data, we can't overburden some map tasks and underutilize some map tasks, under designate some map tasks. In that case, you need to copy a reasonable amount of data to minimize overheads in task setup. Each map copies at least 256 MB. It is ensured that each map task is assigned to copy at least 256 MB. Now, for example, if you want to allocate 1000 maps to perform the copy operation, in that case, you can use my -m 1000. This would allocate 1000 maps, each copying 1 GB on average. So the most amount of data copied can be more, but minimum it ensures that each map copies at least 256 MB so that the task is equally distributed. The task of copying the data is equally distributed across the map jobs. Now, when you try to use DistCP between two HDFS clusters that are running different versions, the copy will fail if you use the HDFS protocol because the RPC systems are incompatible. In the previous case, we have seen that if both are running the same version of Hadoop, you can use the same URI for the source cluster and the destination cluster while using DistCP to copy the data across. But this is not the case if HDFS clusters are running different versions. So the copy will fail in this case if you use HDFS protocol because the RPC systems will not be compatible. Now, when you try to use DistCP between two HDFS clusters that are running different versions, the copy will fail if you use, that is what I repeated again. Okay, now a remedy to this, what is the alternative to this? You can use the read-only HTTP based HFTP file system in this case in order to read the data from the source. So the source URI can be HDFS and the destination URI can be changed to HFTP, HTTP based HFTP, so that the operation will be compatible. So the alternative they suggest here is you can use the read-only HTTP based HFTP file system to read from the source. Now the job must run on the destination cluster so that the HDFS RPC versions are compatible. In this case, the job will run on the destination cluster rather than the source cluster. Now see how we have modified the command here. To repeat the previous example, using HFTP, we modified the command like this. Percentage Hadoop use the DistCP program. Now you are using, sorry, I mentioned it as to be used on destination. No, it has to be mentioned on source cluster. So the HFTP has to be mentioned on the source cluster. HFTP URI should be mentioned on the source cluster, and HDFS URI can be mentioned on the destination cluster. So it is using this number, port number with HFTP in order to copy the data from the source cluster to the destination cluster, which is using the same old HDFS URI. Sometimes you may also use web HDFS also. Using the newer web HDFS protocol, it is possible to use HTTP for both the source and destination clusters without hitting any wire incompatibility problems. say if you can use this web HDFS. Why this web HDFS is more compatible? It doesn't provide only read write option, but it also provides some extra features like Kerberos authentication, and it helps us to use both URI on source cluster as well as the destination cluster. Now see the command how it is modified. Percentage Hadoop distcp. Now we are using web HDFS on the source cluster and web HDFS URI on the destination cluster also, in order to copy the data from the source directory FOO onto the destination directory bar. Notice in this case we are using same URI with the source cluster as well as the destination cluster, because web HDFS is compatible with such usage. Now another variant is to use an HDFS HTTP proxy as the DistCP source or destination, which has the advantage of being able to set firewall and bandwidth controls. Now if you want to implement some bandwidth control policies, or if you want to set up some firewalls between the two clusters while copying the data, in that case you can use HDFS HTTP proxy to be in the place. And this is another variant while copying the data using DistCP from source to destination clusters. Now let us come to actual concept of today's content, that is keeping an HDFS cluster balanced. Sometimes you may tend to overburden one single map with copying the entire set of data. In that case, that particular map will be overburdened. That cluster will be unbalanced. So how to keep it balanced? When copying data into HDFS, it is important to consider the cluster balance. HDFS works best when the file blocks are evenly spread across the cluster. So you have to ensure that DistCP doesn't disrupt this. When DistCP is copying data across the clusters, you should ensure that it doesn't disturb the even spreading of blocks across the cluster. Let us consider the example of copying 1000 GB of data by specifying only map 1, indicating -M1. This indicates that only one map is responsible to copy 1000 GB of data across the cluster. Means this map is overburdened to copy the entire data that is specified. Now above process will be slow and doesn't use the cluster resources efficiently, and means that the first replica of each block would reside on the node running the map until the disk filled up, right? So until the disk filled up, it can go on to other map jobs. So what happens here is only one map job is made responsible to copy the entire data, and the cluster resources, means other map tasks, are not properly or efficiently utilized. So the second and third replicas would be spread across the cluster, but this one node on which the map job is running would be unbalanced. By having more maps than nodes in the cluster, this problem is avoided. So when compared to the nodes in the cluster, if you increase the number of maps, you can see that the cluster would not result in an imbalanced state. So that the map jobs will take the task of equally distributing the map jobs across the cluster, so that one map will not be overburdened for copying the data. For this reason, it is best to start by running DistCP with the default of 20 maps per node. That is why when you are running DistCP program to copy the data from one cluster to another cluster, you have to see that the job is distributed across 20 maps per node, so that all the copying task is distributed across these 20 map jobs, so that one map will not be overburdened. This is how a cluster can be balanced. Now, sometimes it is not always possible to prevent a cluster from becoming unbalanced. You can't completely avoid this scenario. Perhaps in that case, you want to limit the number of maps so that the sum of the nodes can be used by other jobs. Means you can allocate some of the nodes to other jobs. In this case, you can use the balancer tool to subsequently even out the block distribution across the cluster. So in order to balance the entire cluster balance the entire HDFS cluster, you can use balancer tool along with the DISC-CP tool in order to subsequently even out the block distribution across the clusters. Now, how we use Hadoop archives. Say most of the data residing on HDFS clusters may not be frequently accessed. Only some data that is frequently accessed, better to store that data for random access and archive the infrequently accessed data onto say historical archives. Means store the data that is not frequently accessed onto Hadoop archives and utilize the HDFS clusters only to store randomly accessed, frequently accessed data. For that, we use Hadoop archives. A Hadoop archive is created from a collection of files using the archive tool. Now the tool runs a MapReduce job. Even archiving the Hadoop files is done as a MapReduce job. So the tool runs a MapReduce job to process the input files in parallel. So to run it, you need a running MapReduce cluster to actually use it. So in order to archive, you need a running MapReduce cluster. Now let us first see what files you want to archive. List them by using list command. Percentage Hadoop. In this file system, recursively list all the files in this directory. Just see what are the files that are that we want to archive. In this case, you know this representation of the files, right? These are the read-write privileges. This indicates the replication factor. This denotes the owner of that file, the supergroup to which that file belongs, the group to which that file belongs, and how many bytes it occupies, and last modified time, and the actual path to the file. Right now, these are the files in this file system with this path /my/files. Now we can run the archive command using this particular representation. Here we are using percentage Hadoop. You're using the archive command, archive program, in order to give the archive name as files.har. We are using -archive name, means we indicate that whatever follows this -archive name is the name of the archive, Hadoop archive. Here the name of the archive we are giving is files.har, and from which directory we want to archive the files and to which directory we need to store that archived file. I'm repeating once again, we are using percentage Hadoop archive command, and we are denoting the archived file's name by using -archive name, and from which directory you are archiving the files and what is the directory under which the archived file is stored. That is under /my directory. Now let's see what the archive has created. By using list command again, percentage Hadoop file system, list what is there under directory /my. This indicates it contains the contents of the directory my files, and also it contains an archived file into which all these directories files are archived into. So you can notice the new file, archived file created here, files.har. The extension for archived files will be .har, which indicates Hadoop archive. Now, if you want to see the archived contents, archived files contents, again use the list command, percentage Hadoop file system, list the contents of my files archive, my files or archived file under this my directory, right? So what are the contents here? It shows that there are two index files and one path file. This path file contains the concatenated contents of all the files in the directory under my files. This files.har contains two index files and one path file which contains the concatenated content of all the files in this directory, that is my files directory. Means the content of the directory which you try to archive, the files of the directory which you try to archive will be concatenated, and all that content will be stored in this path file, and these details are held in the index file and the master index file. Now the following command recursively lists the files in the archive. So if you want to actually see what are all the contents are there in the archive, you can use %hadoop fs recursively list the files under this URI. You are specifying now the URI as HAR, that is the Hadoop archive URI. Under this my directory, what are all the contents under files.archived file, that is Hadoop archived file. So you will get all the contents here. You can see the directory, the files under the directory, and what all files you try to archive and store in files.har. That can be seen here when the archived files list, when you try to list the files in the archive. Now this is quite straightforward. When the file system that the HAR file is on is the default file system, that is Hadoop file system. But if you want to refer to a HAR file on a different file system, then you need to use a different form of the path URI. Say if you are trying to list it from the same file system that the HAR file is residing, then it is quite easy to mention the path. But if you want to refer to a HAR file on a different file system, you need to use a different form of the path URI. How you do that? In this case, you are using Hadoop file system recursively list the file contents, and you are using HAR scheme to list all the files in this directory. But say if it is on a different file system, you are using file system recursively list the contents of files under HAR URI, and here you are using, though the basic URI is HAR, the authority is held by HDFS, and it specifies on the local host on which port number it is available and from which file you actually want to list the files, from which archived file you actually want to list the files. For that, you have to specify HDFS-localhost, because you are running on a pseudo distributed mode. Specify the port number and the path from which the archived files has to be listed. Now, in order to delete a HAR file, if you don't want an archived file any longer, that data is no longer being used. In that case, there is no meaning in archiving it and wasting the space on a cluster. In that case, if you want to delete a HAR file, you need to use the recursive form of delete, because from the underlying file system's point of view, the HAR file is a directory. HAR file is not treated as exact file, it is treated as a directory. That is why you are using %hadoop, specify the file system, and give the remove command, recursive remove command in this case. That is why we are using -remove rm remove recursively. -rmr, specify the Hadoop archived file that you want to remove. This keeps the archived file removed from the HDFS cluster. Now, before ending this module, let's paraphrase what we have learned in this module from the beginning. We have seen the design of HDFS and how it achieves resilience to system failures or node failures, and what are the concepts in HDFS, namely HDFS availability and HDFS federation, which are the new features added to Hadoop 2.x version, and the command line interface, how we can actually interact with HDFS cluster using the command line interface, and what are the basic file system operations, how you can read and write the data to HDFS from HDFS cluster and to HDFS cluster, and what are the various concrete implementations of Hadoop file systems, and the interfaces that are provided by C, C++, and Fuse, and the Java interface, how it supports interacting with HDFS cluster, and how to query the file system by using the file status commands, and how to delete the data from HDFS cluster. And the most important topic of this chapter, anatomy of a file read and write, how the HDFS client interacts with name node and the data nodes in order to read the data from HDFS cluster or write the data to the HDFS cluster. What exactly happens in the background, that is discussed under this concept, anatomy of a file read and write. And finally, we have seen coherency model, how it provides visibility to the read and writes to a HDFS cluster, and parallel copying using DistCp, how data can be copied across the clusters using DistCp program, and how to keep a cluster, HDFS cluster, balanced by distributing the job across maps equally, and Hadoop archives, how we can create Hadoop archive files in order to store the historic data which is not frequently accessed. So these are the contents we dealt with in this module. And in the next session, let's move on to fifth module, which is actually the last module, and it also requires more time because a lot of complex topics are to be discussed in that module 5. Okay, any doubts so far on the topics discussed? Because we are going to end this module 4. I want you to resolve any doubts if you have, because you can't carry them forward to module 5. That leaves you in doubtful mode again if you have any doubts in this previous chapter. Students, any doubts in 4th module?
No, ma'am.
Okay. Shall we end this meeting then?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, we'll meet in the next class with module 5. Bye.